OWS fam, Sharp Football Analysis Nation. Welcome back to another installment of Searching for Ceiling, presented by One Week Season and Sharp Football Analysis. Now, I know week 5, you've checked out my Twitter, did not go as I would have hoped. For those who don't know what's going on, just keeping it straight with y'all. I transitioned to MME for the first time in my DFS career in week 5, entering 150 lineups into the Millie Maker on DraftKings, and I managed to cash 0 of them. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about that here shortly. But as always, I will be joined shortly by the great Rich Hribar, and until then, let's go.
1 week season.
Rich, happy Friday, my friend.
Yeah, we made it. Here we are, man. Mid-October. Yeah, I almost think it's actually almost more impressive. Like you got to cash just like 3 or 4 lineups. Like you don't have a story there, right? You don't have a story.
Yeah, it's gonna look
have this to draw back on.
It's gonna look so sweet when I ship the Millie this week. Just having those screenshots like back to back, it's gonna be great.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's totally gonna happen. So first of all, thank you sincerely for joining us on this Friday. If you're new here, we do this, Rich and I do this every Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern. And the vast majority of the feedback that we have received so far is positive, extremely positive. That said, we have had some comments that are strictly speaking to my longevity in the tongue. So I'm going to view that as constructive criticism moving forward. And if you took the time to comment on one of these videos, we thank you. And I'm going to view that as constructive criticism and try and shorten my ramblings a little bit. So
usually I'm the one that is, just keeps going.
With that, Chris, yes, here we go. And I want to start this week since the general idea or the general view of this NFL season is chalk is hitting at an extreme rate. So I want to start this week, Rich, with one of the chalkier games on the slate, and that's the Bengals and the Seahawks. So I'll throw it directly over to you. What's your read on this game in this spot?
Yeah, this game is interesting on a number of levels, obviously, because it's, when you look at this slate in context first, right? Like we take the bird's eye view of the whole slate. We've got a lot of big lines again, one-sided games. We don't have a lot of games where we are anticipating there to be like a lot of competitive back and forth games with good offenses, right? Like like Patriots Raiders has a tight line, but like cool. Saints Texans, is there a lot of upside, right? We're searching for that ceiling, then we've got some lopsided lines like the 49ers versus the Browns now with PJ Walker starting the Dolphins once again, another spot against one of these bottom rung teams. So where are like the reciprocal force games? And there's not many on this slate, and it's 11 game slate because we got another London game. And this is kind of the one everyone is drawn to from like a star power stance, right? Like there are good players in this game. And we don't have a lot of games that involve good players on both sides that we expect to score points. I do think there are multiple avenues of failure to this game. Absolutely. Yes. One is we've only seen like the one inkling of Joe Burrow looking a little bit like Joe Burrow last week, but it also came in against this passive, extremely passive, Jonathan Gannon defense, which we talked about last week leading into that game. We're not going to have that here against Seattle. They are getting after the quarterback. Now, granted, anyone's pressure numbers are going to be skewed when you face the New York Giants, but they are getting pressure at a higher rate than the Arizona Cardinals. They're blitzing at a higher rate than the Cardinals. And so can Burrow run that back? Can he build on that momentum that he built up? There's still some fragility there, right? Like that game going into halftime, if Josh Dobbs doesn't throw that pick 6, like that game looks a lot different than how we probably get there. But it's bottom line though, it's just a better defense that Seattle has. Obviously they got Tariq Woolen back right before the bye. Devin Witherspoon went and played the slot with Artie Burns getting injured. Artie Burns isn't supposed to play again this week. So it should be another spot where Devin Witherspoon's like in the slot a little bit more and playing inside. So the Seattle defense just presents a different challenge and what this Bengals offense had last week. And remember, the sample size of the Bengals offense up until that point was a disaster.
Yeah. Yes. That along Along those lines, that's really why I did so poorly last week. Is the field was so certain that the Bengals could not fail. So I took that the other way, and one of my primary leverage points on Week 5 slate was to full fade the Bengals and bring be overweight the Arizona Cardinals defense and be overweight James Conner. Well, we kind of know how that turned out. I missed the highest score of the week, had him on 0 rosters. And the Arizona Cardinals defense buckled due to their offense's inability to move the ball. But when you look at the Bengals, and when you look at Zach Taylor and Joe Burrow in specific, watching that game back, Joe Burrow is not yet out of the woods with his with his calf injury. Um, they still played him almost exclusively from shotgun. Yes, his mobility within the pocket looked a little bit better, but to me, with him playing such a heavy rate of shotgun snaps, that tells me that his calf is not fully there. And when you look at Zach Taylor, the head coach and basically the designer of the offense, he is kind of Jekyll and hiding his way through this season. We have seen the highs. We saw week 4 and week 6, where they were looking to get Jamar Chase involved early. They were sending him in motion at a higher rate. They were bringing him into the slot. Sandwiched between that was a game in week 5 where they largely went away from those tendencies. And that's important because those are some of the things that NFL offenses are doing now to exploit too high. And that's extremely important because we're basically their opponent is been in too high since like they're competing with the Steelers for who can run too high or Tampa 2 the longest. That's just kind of what they do. They run cover 3 from it. They run cover 2. So are we going to see Zach Taylor continue on with those tendencies of looking to get Jamar Chase involved, sending him motion, putting him in the slot? Or are they going to revert back to what we saw in week 5 where they largely fell flat? I don't know. But like you said, that introduces some level of uncertainty in this spot. What about the Seahawks side of the ball? You seen anything there?
Yeah, Seahawks side is interesting. Just yet as to kind of reiterate the Bengals like kind of passing side, Jamar Chase after that Rams game, his slot rate's gone significantly down the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And that could be because T Higgins injury. But that's something to kind of keep an eye on too. They kind of gotten away from that a little bit. We're not really like fading a guy like Jamar Chase. Anytime you have a talent like getting his target levels, like you're just in kind of like that Jefferson Tyreek mode, right? Like
Yeah.
he exists. Obviously, you have to pay for it, though. That's always the good thing, right? That's the fulcrum point. You always have to decide is where to kind of allocate your 9K wide receiver in DFS these days, right? Now we have Cooper Kupp back in our good graces. We did lose. The deities did take Justin Jefferson from us. Last week was a real tough week losing Anthony Richardson, Justin Jefferson, and Achane, like 3 young explosive players, but that hurt. The Seattle side is interesting because I think like the easiest gravitation people have to is just kind of create mini stacks with Jamar Chase and Kenneth Walker, right? You got clearly correlated mini stack. We've got Kenneth Walker as like this doing what his Kenneth Walker thing is, going back to Michigan State, boom bust runner. He's getting all the goal to goal work. He's got 13 of the 15 backfield touches and goal to goal situations. And the Bengals are allowing a lot of explosive runs. They're 31st in the NFL in explosive run rate allowed. So it kind of just leans itself into what Kenneth Walker does. I think if we're keeping the theme of the show, searching for ceiling, there are a couple intriguing plays I think that are appealing on the Seattle side. The first one would be Tyler Lockett. You look at the Bengals, they're allowed a 10% touchdown rate to opposing slot receivers. That's 30th in the league. 5.2 receptions per game to interior wide receivers. That's 21st in the league. Lockett is playing the slot only around like a third of his snaps, but DK Metcalf, that's only 13%. It's significantly higher. And then coming out of the bye, what does this mean for Jackson Smith and Jigba? Do we see an alteration of how he's been used coming out of the bye? We look for like kind of these signals on rookie wide receivers. So far this season, the thing that's killing him is that Seattle is 28th in terms of 11 personnel rate when they drop back to pass. Just 57.5% of their passes have been come with 11 personnel. He's also only getting 3.2 air yards per target. So like we're not even getting any downfield targets for him. 45% of his targets at or behind the line of scrimmage, but he would fit into that mold of like playing the position that like where the Bengals are having the most issues. So if you're talking like large field stuff, like do you do like 4 to 5% like JSN just because the field's not going to play him?
I think you should. A lot of why he has not really been in an environment to succeed up to this point is those heavy 12 personnel rates. They've been between 40 and 60% 12 personnel in every game that they've played. And that is only going to increase in game environments where they are able to kind of control, because now they're shifting their emphasis onto grinding it out, stringing together drives, trying to control the football. So yeah, that's very intriguing though. I think now that he's at 3,600 on DraftKings, something crazy like that. I think you have to, just based on pedigree alone, kind of leverage a little bit of the uncertainty there with JSN. Back to the run game real quick. One of the first bets I made this week was Kenneth Walker longest rush over 15.5 yards. And it was for a lot of the reasons that you talked about. He is this home run hitter type back, runs sub 4.4, 40, and the Bengals are giving up some explosive plays. So the flip side of that from a DFS perspective is that he is primarily a yardage and touchdown back, but that's a little bit mitigated by the matchup. We know he's not going to be highly involved in the pass game, so he is going to need 100 yards and 2 scores in order to return a GPP ceiling for us. But that's well within his range of outcomes here. For a guy like Kenneth Walker, I'll be looking to play him not paired with Jamar Chase on the other side. As I think that is going to be, you nailed that. I think it's going to be the highest owned combination of players from this game. Jake Bobo, dude. What about? No, I'm just kidding. We're not going to go to Jake Bobo. But
we love Jake Bobo, though.
Yeah, we love the guy. Like 4.6 40, just able to score touchdowns because he's a boss. Full on like Jordy Nelson vibes from way back. Anyway, thank you for the comments here, guys. John, appreciate that shout, and Bart, appreciate that shout. Any final onesie twosies here from this game environment before we move on?
No, I think that's it's tough. It looks like Charles Cross might come back for the Seahawks, and the Seahawks have had a really shallow, condensed passing game that may be a byproduct of what we've seen transpire with the offensive line. So it'll be interesting to see if Charles Cross is back, if we get a little more verticality to this passing game. But I'm really just, like I said, I'm the most intriguing aspect to me of Seattle is what do they do coming out of the bye with JSN, because obviously in a lot of these season-long stuff too, like is he a guy like we even going to hold out hope for at this point?
Yeah, based on pedigree alone, I think we have to. But yeah, he's definitely one of those players. Final comment here. I know we keep saying final comment, but he's one of those players that's very much like or akin to Marvin Mims for me. At some point, it's likely to happen, and I want to be there when it does, type thing. Yes, like Marvin Mims has a 100-yard game to his ledger. He has scored all that stuff, but like they're very similar in the sense that once they get the opportunity, the pedigree and the talent is very much there. I'm going to throw it directly over to you. I want to hear from what game of the week is containing the most hidden upside for this slate.
I mean, I'll say when you look at the main slate, like looking at the early games, like we're looking for, like I said, that combative atmosphere. I think pieces and intrigue in terms of how people are going to play this slate. Let's do some Colts Jaguars, right? Like,
it's spicy.
Yeah, there's a lot here in place. Obviously, let's start with just the Minshew side, like with Minshew starting and what it, kind of does for the Colts offense. Obviously, you remove a lot of the RPO components, but they still have played fast with Minshew, which we love.
Yes.
Like this game could easily have the most plays of any game in this slate. And we've got the situation with like this Colts defense, this young, Gus Bradley's doing the Gus Bradley thing. Like he's got a young secondary, he's sitting back and he's just playing like a ton of cover 3. But on the Colts side, with Minshew kind of being in, we have a lot more viability for like the passing game stuff. And we will see a lot more viability for a guy like Josh Downs, right? Where he is at his price. He's been targeted on 26.7% of his routes when Gardner Minshew's been in the game. He has 25% of the team targets when Gardner Minshew's in the game, just 16% with Anthony Richardson under center. So it kind of unlocks a cheapie and a bring back for us like right away. You've got Michael Pittman. He's got a 30% target share. We know we can always count on the volume for Michael Pittman. We would like a little bit more upside in terms of quality of target for Michael Pittman. That's kind of like his bugaboo since entering the NFL. He's
Yeah.
not getting a lot of downfield targets. And it's interesting because he is like a contested catch guy, right? Like he is kind of a clasher and can win in those situations, but he doesn't get a lot of those chances in the construct of this offense consistently. And that's kind of weird. And I don't really know what to tell anyone to do about this backfield, right? Like,
Yeah.
Zach Moss, I mean, you cannot kill this guy. Like he is just like last week, he just comes back. He was incredible in that game last week against the Titans. The Titans didn't have Tier Tart, and that might have been something we should have been more clued in on with Tier Tart being out of that game, maybe being a potential opening up. But like, I still don't know if we would have got there for the volume that Zach Moss got and him having 200 yards. So I don't really know what to tell anyone with Jonathan Taylor having that contract, another week to ramp up. Like, what does the split look like? But I think we're looking at it more of like the Colts passing game is going to be just a lot more viable than it was when we were just kind of chasing, the Anthony Richardson, hell on wheels style of offensive environment.
Yeah, and we kind of had a peek behind the curtain a little bit from coach speak from Shane Steichen as far as what to expect from Jonathan Taylor. So most of what I saw was outcry about signing this running back to a 3-year extension and then not utilizing him. It's like, well, they kind of told us that they were going to do that, right? We also have the same coach with new coach speak saying they intend to ramp up his involvement moving forward. Before he played his first game of the season in week 5, they said that could take 4 weeks was the time frame that they gave. But this week he said, yeah, we're going to ramp up his involvement moving forward. So that's a very interesting spot. I would not think that we're going to see either of these backs kind of be the 80% player that we got last week. But on the same side, it's a very, very interesting position to take a shot on a guy like Jonathan Taylor. We know kind of who he is when nobody else is. The other side of that discussion is the matchup is not ideal. The Jaguars are very much a pass funnel defense to this point in the season. So that kind of takes some of that, or that has to hold some weight for us as well. Love the Josh Downs call. What about the Jags? What are you seeing from them?
We mentioned kind of Gus Bradley, and he's trying to insulate this young secondary. They've been a target for us, kind of all week. I was actually pretty surprised when we got to Sunday how heavily owned DeAndre Hopkins was. He was a guy I was on like last week, and then early last week we brought him up on the show, and he ended up being really popular. The Colts play the most cover 3 in the NFL, 61% of snaps. Calvin Ridley leads this team in targets per route run against cover 3, yards per route run against cover 3. I think you're going to get some steam for him. Also, it's like our first rematch game of the season. I think this is the first rematch we've had overall. And, Ridley had the 8 for 101 and a touchdown already against the Colts. So I think people will get there. So how do we kind of pull away leverage? I think Ridley's a good play, by the way. I'm not saying, but just how do we create leverage? Do we have to do Trevor Lawrence doubles? And then do we add a guy like Evan Ingram? Do we add the tight end into play who's second on the team in targets per out run against cover 3? Do we stick with Christian Kirk, who's been kind of just a really solid producer since Zay Jones has been out? And Zay Jones looks like he's not going to be up for this game again after re-injuring his knee in London. So I think there's ways to get creative there by adding a double in there. And then, or do you just go the outright flip side, and do we look at what happened in London with Travis Etienne getting it was only his second goal to goal carry, because that's all he's been missing. This is literally the only thing Travis Etienne has been missing to jump into like that stratosphere of running back we're looking for in fantasy football, because his receptions are way up this year. He's averaging 3.6 catches per game after 2.1 per game last year. He's just dominating the overall backfield work. He's got 83% of the backfield touches. We haven't even seen Tank Bigsby except for those goal line poaching situations. Yeah. So if he's going to get those, and he also converted a 2-point conversion, which doesn't count as a goal to go situation in the box scores, but I mentally count that as a goal to go carry in short yards. But if he's just going to have those unlocked for him, those opportunities, he checks every single box that we're looking for from a DFS play, especially when you factor in from a leverage stance, because we are going to see Lawrence be popular in this game. We are going to see Ridley be popular in this game. So we have to get unique around that, whether it be adding a double or going the Travis Etienne side.
Yeah, and you look at Etienne, the most evaded tackles through the first 5 weeks of the season. Breakaway run rate is not really where we'd want it to be. He ranks 27th at 4.2. But he's heavily involved in the pass offense. He has the 6th most receptions. He has run the second most routes in the league. And like you said, where we've really been missing that final piece for Travis Etienne was in the red zone. And we saw Tank Bigsby has 3 red zone touches, converted 2 of them to 1-yard touchdowns. And Travis Etienne only had 5 red zone touches through the first 5 weeks. So that piece has been largely missing. I don't know. It seems like a solid spot to take a little stance here against an Indianapolis defense. The one thing is, both of these defenses are more or less pass funnel. Both of them are in the top 10 in the league in yards allowed before contact. So how does that play out? I would think, honestly, I have not looked at ownership because I don't do that as part of my process until Friday evening, Saturday morning. I would think that Christian Kirk seeing 40 targets over the last 4 games is probably going to be the highest ownership of this game. Have you looked at ownership? Can you?
I haven't. I just my initial feeling is every show I've been on, someone brings up Calvin Ridley. So like,
yes.
So anytime that happens, I just think like, all right, well, if everyone's bringing up Calvin Ridley, that means a lot of listeners, right? Like on these shows, like are gonna just play him, right? Like they keep hearing how like it just like submerges into your brain, right? Seeps into you're like, well, I guess I'm playing Calvin Ridley. But so I mean, we'll have to check, ownership. That's definitely something to keep an eye on. I think Ridley's a great play, by the way, too. So just how do we get unique around that if it ends up being the popular play? So we'll check Sunday. Like obviously, if Christian Kirk comes in being lower owned, I know on DraftKings he's 5,400. Which is a great price point for a guy like Christian Kirk. And we always talk about like where we're going to get these targets. You look at Trevor Lawrence in this 3 matchups since the start of last year against Gus Bradley, he's completed 83% of his passes, which is crazy because everything's lower ADOT, right? It's lower ADOT stuff, higher conversion rate. That's why I kind of also was a little bit intrigued by if you're stacking this game, maybe this is the game Evan Ingram gets into the box. He does have 5 or more catches in those 3 games. He's not getting a lot of yardage, but like, he is a guy that we know has a ceiling at a position that lacks kind of true ceilings. We haven't seen it yet this year, but you going back to last year, Evan Ingram was a guy that flirted with a couple 30-point games. So is he a way to get kind of unique too here?
Yeah. And you talk about like where targets just fundamentally flow against cover 3. It's typically to the alpha wide receiver, and then the tight end can step into some as well. And Evan Ingram has exactly 8 targets in 4 out of his 5 games, so we know the volume is there. From what I expect from the field, I think based on my read on the situation and my read on the slate right now, Friday at noon, I think that the highest composite ownership is going to be on the pairing on the screen with Christian Kirk and Josh Downs. Christian Kirk, we just talked about 40 targets over his previous 4 games. I think the field realizes that Josh Downs sees an increase in utilization with Gardner Minshew at quarterback. And I think this is going to be a game where the field is looking for value because we might have some running back value on the slate for the first big time in this season. But outside of that, the value is fairly sparse at wide receiver. So the standard build this season of like looking to jam in as many high-priced wide receivers as we can, this might be a game where people are looking to go to save some salary. But again, that's my feel. That is not, I have not even looked at ownership. That's my feel on the slate, on the situation. If that's the case, it becomes very easy to play some Calvin Ridley, to play some Evan Ingram, to play both of them with their quarterback and do some interesting things from this spot.
Yeah, especially because I said the signal is all in Ridley's favor anyways.
Yeah.
All the cover 3 stuff aligns with him. It's interesting when you look at this slate from a top-down perspective because this is probably who is jamming in, who are we saving salary for at running back? That's the thing. There isn't really like, are people going to jam Christian McCaffrey in this week? I don't think they're actually going to, where he has been in. We had talked for weeks that he was under-owned, and someone in the chat was like, well, he's only giving you 25s, not 40s, and then he had 50 that week. Against the Cardinals. Exactly. But you look at the situation that the 49ers are in, going on the road to Cleveland. That game is a severely depressed game total. We'll need your aviation reports too this week. There was some early in the week people were worried, but it looks like things are alleviating. on the East Coast. Cleveland, Cincinnati, Chicago were all initially supposed to have like pretty crummy weather, and now it looks like it's looking a little bit better. But PJ Walker starting, like, is it are people really need to get that 9.5K, that 10K on FanDuel to get to Christian McCaffrey? I don't really think that exists this week.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. Let's talk about that real quick. And I think, based on just my early read of the weather, I think the worst of it was kind of what we saw last night in Kansas City, with some swirling winds. It's going to depend on the stadium and the orientation of the stadium, and that's something that is almost more important than the strength of the wind. I mean, because we saw Harrison Butker kick a 60-yarder last night in that game environment, which is probably going to be as bad as it gets this weekend, if I had to guess. But yeah, we'll circle back to that and take a look at the weather here later on in the week. Let's talk about the San Francisco 49ers, because this is a team clearly that puts up points on the scoreboard. I mean, now we're at 10 out of the last 12 Brock Purdy starts in the regular season. This team has scored 30 points. Yes, this is going to be 100% a strength on strength matchup. We have the number 1 overall defense in the Cleveland Browns. Surprise, surprise. And the number 3 overall defense in the San Francisco 49ers. And that's a combination of points allowed, yardage allowed, and the rest of the metrics that go into that. So this is a very interesting spot. We also have Deshaun Watson has now been ruled out. We have the backup quarterback coming in that you just alluded to. So is this game, does it carry upside? And particularly speaking, I guess, with San Francisco's side of it.
I mean, the 49ers get there. The problem is always trying to diagnose like who's getting there. I think there is a clear signal as long as weather and everything checks out. But we're trying to figure out what we really have in this Browns defense. We know that the talent is there, and we know they're a good defense. We know these things to be unequivocally true. The question is, where do they actually fall on the spectrum? Because a lot of their numbers actually that are produced are more offensive numbers for the opposition than I believe they're truly defensive numbers for them. You open the season, Joe Burrow doesn't play in the preseason. You open that game in the rain against him. They face Kenny Pickett the following week on Monday night, and then they face Ryan Tannehill the week after that. The last time we saw this Browns defense, they allowed Lamar Jackson to complete 79% of his passes for almost 10 yards per pass attempt. Mm-hmm. He was highly efficient. If there's one thing that we can count on kind of with this 49ers passing game, is like it's going to be a catalyst through efficiency, right? Like that's how it operates. Structurally, the way the Browns play defense, no one plays man coverage more than the Browns right now. Mm-hmm. They're playing the highest rate of man coverage in the NFL. That has historically been a signal for Brandon Ayuk to just smash. Yes. He leads the team with a 30% target share already in the routes. He's 8th in the NFL. Only Tyreek Hill and Marvin Mims are averaging more yards per route run than Brandon Ayuk. I just had to keep throwing in Marvin Mims for you.
Thanks, man.
Playing. Once again, last night he ran fewer pass routes than little Jordan Humphrey.
Oh my God.
Pretty cool.
Who was not on the team until the morning of.
Yeah, but against man coverage, Brandon Ayuk's been targeted on 30.4% of his routes. That's where we look. He's absolutely destroyed man coverage in his career. So like he would be a guy, as long as everything checks out, like we want to look to him, especially where he's priced right under DJ Moore, who's going to be really popular probably again. Yeah. Definitely love Brandon Ayuk to pop off in that area.
Do you think that we might see some Denzel Ward traveling in this spot?
Maybe we could. It's tough because like the 49ers, like they traditionally, you have the Deebo Samuel factor, like, right. Like, yeah. So they're like a hard team to kind of like shadow against.
Yeah, exactly.
And the reason that the Deebo thing is tough is this is why teams haven't been able to replicate the Deebo role when everyone was like trying to act like, well, Wan'Dale Robinson's going to get his draft stock elevated because of the Deebo role. It's because Deebo's a good wide receiver, right? So when the 49ers show you 11 personnel, you have to, respect pass because Deebo can win on the outside. And then that forces you, then you have to come in as sub package, right? They're showing you 11 personnel. We come out in sub package and now Deebo Samuel's in the backfield. Well, Jesus Christ. Yeah. What do we do? And then you add in McCaffrey. The 49ers are they're such a bastard to defend because what they show you personnel wise, they can show you so many different looks with that personnel. On the field. Juszczyk caught a slant last week. Juszczyk caught like a 7-yard slant, like split out wide. It's like just nightmare fuel, man.
Yeah. Was that the one that he took down to the 1-yard line?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was nightmare fuel for this because if you're a defensive coordinator and you're trying to get your packages in, right, to defend like these personnel groupings. And like you said, like use check split out wide. Debo's in the backfield. McCaffrey's in the slot. Like it's just
what?
just what the hell, man.
And it's not just Debo that is the motion man. Like typically teams have like the motion man. Look at the Chiefs last night. Travis Kelce could be the motion man. You had any number of the 15 wide receivers that play have been utilized, except Marquez Valdes-Scantling. He doesn't go in motion because that's just not what they use him for. But like that is similar to this San Francisco and Kyle Shanahan's offense. Like George Kittle can go in motion. You have Deebo Samuel who can go in motion. Christian McCaffrey who can start in the backfield and go in motion to the out wide. You have Brandon Ayuk who's been used in motion. These players or this offense is super difficult to defend. So when you get any matchup that the defense is going to play extreme rates of man coverage, I think there's upside there, especially when you talk about the San Francisco 49ers. Yes, Brandon Ayuk. I'm starting to come into my own in the betting realm. And Brandon Ayuk's yardage for this spot, sit down for me, Rich. It opened at 41.5 yards. I put a super max whale bet on that one on the over. But Brandon Ayuk is very, very interesting. I don't think you can ever discount, yes, the Browns rush defense. They're allowing the second fewest yards per rush attempt. I don't think you can ever discount Christian McCaffrey. I mean, a guy who scored 13 times in a row, that ceiling is always going to be there. And I think that we might see these players just go, they have been week to week under-owned, but I think even more so in this spot.
People don't like the floor for the 49ers guys, right? Because the 49ers, all these guys, and even Ayuk's shown it, like the offense is predicated on efficiency over volume. So when you squeeze the volume, there's guys that just get froze out on a weekly basis. Typically it ends up being Kittle. He did make the most of his volume last week on Sunday night, but
his 4 targets.
But a lot of people don't like trying to play the guessing game for who's the 49er that's going to get 4 targets today. I mean, 2 weeks ago, Deebo Samuel didn't even have a target.
Yeah.
So like people hate that, and they hate the floor potential for a lot of these 49ers guys. That's why they end up typically come in under-owned in tournaments.
Yes. And Paul, yes, this is going to lead us to the next game that we're going to discuss, and that is going to be the Vikings and the Bears. What are you seeing from this spot?
This was another one of the games, like early in the week, people were like trying to freak out apart. This is the game probably people want to hear the most about because of all just the moving parts in it, right?
About weather?
Because we have the Bears
just
backfield,
about us breaking it down, yeah.
And then we have the Justin Jefferson factor, right? So we have the Bears absolutely could not survive last Thursday. Roschon Johnson left the game with a concussion in the first quarter. Travis Homer then had a hamstring injury. Then Khalil Herbert had an ankle injury after that. They've signed Darrington Evans, and up until this point, it's Friday at 12:30 Eastern. Roschon Johnson has not practiced yet and has not cleared the protocol. He still has window because they played last Thursday, but not a great sign that we're at this point of the week and he hasn't. So are we going to get Deontay Foreman, a capable back, right? Like that's the best thing I could say to like, he's a guy that's going to get you a high yards after contact, viable if you give him a lot of touches. He's super cheap. He'll just be a volume play based on what he can open up based on the Bears being, kind of in a high, a game at home with like a high, point spread, tight point spread, I should say. Not a great matchup, but just what he can unlock for you. Like he'll be a gravitational pull play. And then you remove Justin Jefferson from this Vikings offense, and everyone's going to want to glom on to Jordan Addison, who I think is more fragile than people are letting on, just because of where he's priced. And I think he's definitely the guy that gets the biggest bump, but like Jordan Addison was already priced in like a unique spot. So from projected volume stance, I think there are avenues for Jordan Addison to fail. Like I'm seeing projected stuff, and we'll see what comes in on Sunday, but like, I feel like his ownership is already tracking to be relatively way too high for where he's priced, because the guys that orbit him also project to have similar target shares. Right. So it'd be different if like Jordan Addison was like 4-4 and Justin Jefferson got hurt, right? Like you just jam him in and you take what you can. But at 5-7 and 6-7 on FanDuel, like there's some, like, it's not just as clear where he's like an auto play, I don't think.
I saw this spot developing because we have two defenses who are around the middle of the pack, and the Bears are actually in the top half of the league in yards allowed per carry and yards allowed before contact. They struggle mightily. They allow the second deepest ADOT. They struggle through the air. So they struggle. This is an interesting spot because we have a defense that is playing like a pass funnel defense in the Bears against a Minnesota offense that we know they've been top 5 in pass rate over expectation and total pass volume each of the last 2 seasons. And they're right there again this year. So this is a very interesting spot. And to answer this question, is Hawkinson the best non-running back chalk of the season this week? I don't know, to be honest, because look at his ADOT. He's got like a sub 6 ADOT. He's not utilized in the same role like he was in Detroit. He came over to Minnesota. They cut down his downfield work. He has seen one downfield target this season. One. Let me repeat that, one. So this is a guy who is highly reliant on volume. Yes, that volume should be there this week, but he's also going to need to score and possibly score multiple times on this price. So to answer that question in a roundabout way, I don't know. I think I want exposure to that position. I want TJ Hawkinson exposure this week, but there are avenues to failure, and I think some of those are not going to be discussed this week. Rich, what's your view on that discussion with Hawkinson?
Yeah, and I wrote about this last year, like in the middle of the season when they acquired TJ Hawkinson, that they were bringing him in to change Justin Jefferson's role. Through till that point of the season last year, Justin Jefferson was getting no downfield work and no intermediate work. It was all shallow, near the line of scrimmage stuff predicated on volume. And when they added Hawkinson to come and take those routes and those targets, it opened Justin Jefferson's ceiling up. He started to get a lot more intermediate looks, started to run that the system wants to run. They want to run those digs and those inbreakers, right? And that's where Justin Jefferson started to thrive after the addition of TJ Hawkinson. So who gets those, right? Like, does anyone get those? Is it going to be Jordan Addison, who's kind of been used strictly as a lid lifter to this point? KJ Osborne has been really disappointing to start this season compared to where he finished off last year. He did have the spike weeks last year, and he finished last season on a positive note, but he's really struggled this year. He's struggled to hang on to the football. He struggled to earn targets. Even when Justin Jefferson left last week's game, Brandon Powell came in and out-targeted him. So, Brandon Powell knows the system. He's a Kevin O'Connell guy back from with the Rams. But to answer your question on Hawkinson, I agree with you. I just think that the way he's being utilized, unless we see him change, he's, 6'6" on DraftKings, on FanDuel, he's 6'7". Like, you have to have multiple touchdowns there. And like, I just don't want to allocate my salary to a player that's not like, that's just predicated on like, I need him to get 12 targets, right? Like, I want to spend that elsewhere. So like, it's really tough. I'll be under on him. I've been kind of consistently under on him all year. Let's see if he drags me into the shadow realm here. But
so this is an interesting discussion. So a guy like TJ Hawkinson with a low ADOT role that needs multiple touchdowns likely to return GPP ceiling, typically we would advise to always play him with his quarterback, because if he's scoring multiple touchdowns and becoming in the optimal or approaching the optimal discussion, that directly correlates to a potential ceiling game for his quarterback. In this spot, opposite Justin Fields, a very, very interesting game theoretic discussion to be had is, can I access TJ Hawkinson's ceiling through Justin Fields? Which is something that I think is going to go largely overlooked in this spot. So something like playing Justin Fields with Cole Kmet and TJ. I know I'm talking about double tight ends. Don't break me over the coals. The Coles Kmets. Sorry, that was bad. But Cole Kmet with TJ Hawkinson and Justin Fields is direct leverage off of DJ Moore, and is direct leverage off of the theoretical optimal way of playing TJ Hawkinson this week, which is paired with Kirk Cousins. Taking that discussion one step further, if we are playing TJ Hawkinson and we also want to attach him to Kirk Cousins, where is the yardage coming from that pushes Kirk Cousins over the 300-yard threshold? Because on DraftKings, the only way that Kirk Cousins is approaching the optimal discussion is if he passes for 300 plus yards and 3 or more touchdowns. So those touchdowns can be accounted for through TJ Hawkinson. but it is highly unlikely that Hawkinson is contributing in a major way to that yardage. So is that Jordan Addison as well? Is that KJ Osborne as well? Is that Brandon Powell as well? I don't know, but I would, if I'm playing TJ Hawkinson, theoretically, we should pair him with Kirk Cousins. And then we should also theoretically pair that with another member of Minnesota. So that's kind of the theoretics behind the spot. Anything to add on that before we move on?
No, I will say, like, on the field side, like, obviously Fields always has a ceiling. One thing that I think is interesting to watch with this, though, is how much rushing we get from Fields because of how much zone the Vikings play. So the Vikings blitz a lot, but they play just all zone coverage behind it. And if you look at all the quarterbacks they face, the quarterbacks are not running against them, like in terms of scrambles. Like, the ball's coming out short because they blitz and they play zone. The ball comes out short, low A dot stuff. So it's just one thing to watch here is does Fields actually have the rushing ceiling that we typically believe that he, carries on a weekly basis? Because Mahomes obviously had the calf thing. They called it a calf frog last week, but he didn't run. Jalen Hurts had 2 tush-push touchdowns against the Vikings, but he did not scramble at all in that game. So one thing to just kind of watch here is if we do not get like kind of the scramble rate stuff for Justin Fields.
On that note, because this offense has been so hyper concentrated through the air over the last 2 weeks, we have seen 7 of the 8 touchdowns scored by either DJ Moore or Cole Kmet. We have seen almost 80% of the yardage output between those two players over those 2 weeks. And we know that the Luke Getsy kind of offense is attempting to make Justin Fields this like pocket passer plus mobility instead of building the offense around his mobility.
Yeah.
So is that a spot where Justin Fields doubles with DJ Moore and Cole Kmet are in play here?
I think that's going to be the most popular thing. I think we're going to see Fields be one of the more popular quarterbacks. And I say that in context of quarterback ownership, which is never high. And DJ Moore is just going to be where he's priced on DraftKings. FanDuel, he's a little bit higher, so you have to make more of a decision there. FanDuel also just been a lot more progressive with their pricing than DraftKings through 5 weeks. Even Raheem Mostert's the second highest priced running back over on FanDuel, where he was not really touched on DraftKings.
Yeah.
But I think DJ Moore is going to just have a lot of pull to him. He's going to have a lot, and then Cole Kmet has just been an inherent double because of the touchdown stuff. And we talked about him. You were on him 2 weeks ago, nailed it. And his usage, even going back to last year, all his rate stuff's been good. We just needed the passing volume to go up, and we've had that the past 2 weeks with the Bears. But I do think there is probably some regression in store for this passing game. I mean, Fields now is number 1 in the NFL in passing touchdowns thrown over expectation. It's just funny how we work on small samples, and like through 5 weeks, you have these 2 spike week games, and it flips, and the narrative's totally changed on Fields now, right?
Yeah.
But there probably is going to be some regression in terms of passing efficiency and passing touchdowns in this offense. But I kind of like getting away from this game a little bit more than I think the field does.
Ooh, interesting. That's
I mean, obviously, if you're in like a cash game environment and you're playing the Addisons of the world and you're playing assuming that it's just Deontay Foreman and Darrington Evans, like I have no problem like going that route, right? Like you're just playing the volume. But I'm curious to see what this Vikings offense actually does in turn. Because like you said, where do the big plays in this offense come from? We believe it's through Jordan Addison, but I don't love that like the early projected ownership I'm seeing on Addison for tournament stuff, like the way I play. So like I find like myself actually kind of wanting to get away from this game, I think more than most. So I can't wait to get like this to be my Bengals take of this week.
No. So I'm pulling up some running backs on the screen, and we talked earlier about the fact that volume or value is largely going to be difficult to come by on this slate, and where the field is likeliest to go for that value is at running back. While Rich was speaking, we had Miles Sanders ruled out, so Chuba Hubbard is likely to be the lead back. Chuba Hubbard likely to be the lead back against Miami. We have the discussion of Amari DeMarcado or whatever the hell his other name is in Arizona. Keontae Ingram. Thank you. In a difficult matchup against the Rams. And we have Deontay Foreman that could be stepping into the lead back role in Chicago. So searching for value on the slate, I think it's highly likely that we see the field utilize one of these backs. might be Chuba Hubbard leading in the clubhouse to find that value. So when we talk about here, this comment about CMC, this, I think, is where the field is likeliest to go. And the comment reads, it's very tough to get to CMC 2 times 7,500 players or CMC plus a 6K player. I'll take the 2 by 7,500 guys. I think that is the 80% solution for the field as well. So that is why theoretically we should not discount a guy like CMC, particularly on this slate where value is going to be hard to find, meaning people are not going to get up to CMC at a high rate. So that is kind of the theoretics behind that discussion. We also, this comment,
Are you playing some 3K LaVisca Chenault now?
No, stop it. You stop it.
He had literally them goal line carries last week.
I know, yeah, which is interesting.
But I think now we're talking about the 3, because now with that dropping, Hubbard versus, let's say, Deontay Foreman. Let's just assume for the sake of this conversation, and DeMercado, that Hubbard will clearly be the dude people get to over the other 2.
Yes. This is where the field is likeliest to go. We were kind of waiting on that news, and it literally popped during the show. So when we're talking about like searching for ceiling, we also want to think about how those pieces fit together on a roster, because it's a little bit more, this beautiful game that we play is a little bit more than just like highlighting the best plays or the guys that could go underlooked and overperform that. It's about like constructing a roster, right? So that's why that like discussion with CMC is so important. That's why we need to have a good grasp on the slate and figure out like, where do we expect the field to be going? What does that mean for the rosters in play on a given slate? And then how do we leverage that? If you're more interested in hearing about the theoretics, the analytical side, and the conceptual side of DFS, head on over to oneweekseason.com, get signed up for Inner Circle, because that's where all of these thoughts come out. Also, down in the description, you'll find a link to save 40% on a subscription, to Sharp Football Analysis. So with that out of the way, Rich, we got about 12 minutes left. Are there any other interesting spots around the slate this week that you're looking to leverage?
I mean, we got to do some Cardinals Rams, right? It's the highest game total. And
I was hoping you'd go there, baby.
It's the late game. Yes. I mean, maybe the Cardinals are just going to be this team like the Colts, right? Where we just kind of target weekly, because they were frisky against Dallas, but like outside of that Dallas game, like this defense is largely who we thought they were going to be, under Jonathan Gannon. They are last in the NFL in terms of pressure rate. They are last in the NFL in blitz rate. They're 25th in rate of man coverage. And when you look at it from like a Matthew Stafford stance, like when he has not been pressured this season, he's averaging 8.2 yards per pass attempt. That's 8th in the NFL. When he has been pressured, it's 4.8 yards per pass attempt, which is 25th. You always want to speed a guy like Stafford up, as good as he's played. When Arizona themselves have not pressured the opposing passer, quarterbacks are completing 76% of their passes against them, 8.4 yards per pass attempt, 109 rating. If they're not going to get home here, I mean, this is just kind of a wheels up situation. And I think people are going to be on the Rams guys. So you have to do this. Do we try to talk ourselves into Kyron Williams in this spot? The signal, because Cooper Kupp, I said back in our hearts earlier in the show, it's great to see him back. He ran every pass route except for one on a Matthew Stafford drop back. So like McVay did not lie to us. There was no BS. He said like when Cooper Kupp is back, he will be back. And he held true to that word. But this in particular game, like there's a big Puka Nacua signal again, because not just was there the 32% team target share for him when Cooper Kupp coming back, and we got evidence that these guys could coexist. We believed that they could anyways. But he had the same wonky splits against man and zone that always were true. 32% target rate per route run against zone coverage against the Eagles last week, 18.8% target rate against man coverage. On the season now, he's been targeted on 34.6% of his routes against zone coverage. Only Tyreek Hill has been targeted at a higher rate against zone coverage. Against man coverage, 18.4%. So just a massive drop off in terms of where Nacua is seeing his routes and what's diagnosed pre-snap from Matthew Stafford. So if obviously a lot of people are going to be clamoring to get Cooper Kupp back in the lineup. So hell, I want to play Cooper Kupp too. I will play Cooper Kupp, but definitely Puka Nacua, don't let him go overlooked in this spot.
And that's an interesting discussion too. I think the cheapest primary piece of this offense, not talking about Tutu Atwell, Tutu Atwell is great, but he's primarily the piece of this offense that is utilized at a heavy rate against man coverage because he's the motion man, yada yada yada. We've talked about that a lot on this show. As far as coming into a matchup where we expect heavy rates of zone, we expect heavy rates of too high, we expect heavy rates of shallow too high with the safeties cheating up against towards the line. This is a very interesting spot to double stack Stafford with Cooper Cup and Puka Nacua because they are so expensive and the field is just probably not going to get there. But would we be all that surprised? We wake up on Monday morning, it's like, oh yeah, Matthew Stafford finally threw for some touchdowns, had the touchdown regression swing in his favor, and the team scored 5 touchdowns. I would not be that surprised in this spot should that happen. I think the field is likely going to see Kyren Williams priced at only 6,500 and really want to take an overweight stance. The guy has scored 6 touchdowns. They're playing the Cardinals. We know their struggles against the run. So from a theoretical perspective, if I think the field is going to Kyren Williams, we have a quarterback in Matthew Stafford who has been hovering around the 300 yards in every game except last week against a very tough defense in Philly. And he was on pace in the first half to get there too. He was at like 157 and 2 touchdowns in the first half. But yes, the defensive adjustments that were made in the second half kind of precluded that. But at some point, Matthew Stafford is going to put up a game where he passes for 300 yards and throws for 3 or 4 touchdowns. And again, that discussion about like rookies this time of year, I want to be there when that happens. So this double of Stafford, Puka, and Cooper Cup, where we think that most of the volume is going to be going, and the fact that it eats up half of our salary via this 3-player primary stack, it's largely going to go unowned on this slate. So highly interested, and I love that we're talking about this spot.
Yeah, and you've got the Arizona side offers just so many natural bounce back options. I mean, DraftKings refuses to change Hollywood Brown's pricing, even though he's getting 30% of the team targets every week. You can always get crusty Zach Ertz in there if you want to just chase volume. Obviously, people will see what Dallas Goedert did against the Rams last week and try to chase some of that. And then you have the DeMercado factor, like just the wild card factor of what do you get out of DeMercado, who obviously from a salary perspective fits that stack easily as well. So all the Arizona bring back guys are relatively cheap, even if you want to get down to the Rondale Moores and Michael Wilsons of the world. Like it's very, if you're going to do this double, you'll have no pushback getting the Arizona pieces you want to kind of alleviate some of the salary you're spending.
And because of that salary, Marquise Brown is not going to be on rosters that do this as well. So some interesting angles from this spot for sure. I think we need to be paying attention to Puka Nacua and Cooper Cup on every slate from here on out, just because so much of the offense is probably going to be running through those 2 guys, particularly against zone.
And they're bad at running the football. Like they're bad. Like Kyren Williams has the touchdowns, but they're a bad running team. Like they're structurally bad at running the football. And there's like some of that with the Bengals too, right? Like, I actually ended up coming way lighter on Joe Mixon than I thought because the ownership was projected to be so high last week. And thank goodness, even though he almost got into the box, 4 straight times. But they're another team that's just structurally not good at running the football. And we didn't talk about the Bengals, but because they have to play so much shotgun now because of Burrow, it's actually hurting their downhill running game.
Yep. 100%. And you look at Kyren Williams, he's provided 2 GPP viable scores this season, 28 points and 30.7 points. He had to score 2 touchdowns in both those games, and he just barely cracked 100 yards rushing in one of them as well. So if this guy is not scoring, he is highly unlikely to be providing a GPP ceiling. And if he's not scoring, that means it's much more likely in this spot, because we don't expect the Rams to just fail like they did in the second half against Philly, that the passing game is where the production is flowing. And because touchdowns are so filled with variance, that is a highly, highly plus EV spot to take a shot on this week, is through the Rams passing game. We'll leave it at that, or unless you have some other something else to bring out from this spot.
No. I think that's going to be, obviously the late slate game. We look at the games in the late slate. You've got Raiders, Pats, The only two teams in the NFL that have gone under their implied total in every game this season, both play each other.
Yeah.
And then you've got this Eagles-Jets matchup, that's kind of interesting, but what kind of ceilings do we have? I'm very excited just to see what the Eagles do from how they deploy AJ Brown in this game.
Yeah.
Because, obviously we want to attack the Jets, on the interior. We've seen two big games against the Jets because they don't give up any points to wide receivers. Usually they've allowed the lowest rate of points scored to go to the wide receiver position. But we have seen two instances where the Bills moved Stephon Diggs in week 1 away from Sauce Gardner, and they moved him around. And then the Cowboys, obviously CeeDee Lamb plays more in the slot anyways, but CeeDee Lamb only caught one of his passes lined up at right wide receiver in that game. So I'm just very intrigued to see how the Eagles deploy their wide receivers in that game and how they go about attacking the Jets. It looks like DJ Reed is still a question mark too, so that might open up some things for them. But I think from a schematic stance, I'm looking for. But are those guys we're going to get to? AJ Brown's absolutely been on fire.
Yeah. And we saw the team finally emphasize tight end Dallas Goedert in a game as well. So we know this offense is kind of the squeaky wheel. They buy into that. Is the squeaky wheel this week Devontae Smith? I don't know. Maybe I'll have some Smith for that reason. If anyone is going to see alpha treatment in this offense, it's going to be AJ Brown. And that might open up some interesting angles for Smith to get going this week. Real quick before we go, we only have 3 minutes left, but real quick before we go, we got to mention the Miami Dolphins, obviously just lighting the world on fire on offense. Real quick, give me your elevator pitch on the Dolphins this week.
Listen, the Dolphins are going to score 30 points. So you just go for it. I mean, and again, Tua is like, it's crazy. We're not getting the runouts as far as Tua from a fantasy perspective. He said 2 monster games, like 3 games where actually was out of the top 12 scorers, his other 3 games. But the Panthers are not getting any pressure on the quarterback and Tua. And I think when you look at like the way Brock Purdy is, like it's not a coincidence that like when you look at quarterback like efficiency when they're not pressured and you see Brock Purdy, Tua, and even Jimmy Garoppolo's up there again, like structurally, and like you think of the schemes that these guys are all from, like that these guys are the best quarterbacks in the NFL and they're not pressured. So with kind of the backfield in flux again with Achane moving out, obviously people are going to play a lot of Mostert, but this could just be another like flood to a spot where he has 300 yards. You just hope he doesn't have the turnovers he had last week.
Yeah, and that's also interesting because Jeff Wilson, they're still just pulled it up to show the blurb, but they're still undecided whether or not they want to activate Jeff Wilson. So it could be Raheem Mostert and Savon Ahmed that are the 1-2 punch in this spot. I would think that you could run some interesting Tua doubles, Tua with Raheem Mostert and Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle, and have some leverage. The last spot I want to talk about before we get out of here is Nico Collins, because Tank Dell was just ruled out. Again, Rich, while Rich was speaking. So you are the Grim Reaper of questionable people coming in. No, but we kind of expected this. There has only been one player that has played the game following suffering a concussion. That was Packers tight end Luke Musgrave. And that came from Thursday going to a Monday game. He's the only instance of a player to play following a concussion. So we kind of assumed that Tank Dell would be iffy to go here. Nico Collins is in the midst of a true breakout season and now should see a matchup where he is even more so the primary focal point through the air. And we know that they have struggled to run the ball, and this matchup tilts towards the air. So play Nico Collins. Rich, take us out, man. Any final parting shots?
No, I think we covered a lot of ground again. I enjoyed doing this show every week. Absolutely. We touched on a lot of bases. We always try to hit things from a unique lens. So hopefully some people that listen to the show make some unique plays and put them together in some lineups and, hit those cash lines. And hopefully someone takes something down big because the holidays are coming.
Let's go, man. Sick shout. I love that. As always, you can find Rich and I on Searching for Ceiling every Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern. Go check out 1 Week Season, check out Inner Circle, go check out Sharp Football Analysis. And until next week, we will see you in them draft lobbies. See you at the top of the leaderboards, y'all. See you.
1 Week Season.